Welcome back to the YouTube channel, and today we're going to be doing a reaction about a Harvard professor dealing with police brutality. I think this looked interesting to me, so I decided to react to it. So let's dive right into it, and it should be interesting.
Roland, it's awesome to have you on the show. I've been tracking your work for a very long time. The conversation you had with our good friend Barry Weiss was one of the most interesting and funny things that I've ever seen. Not, as it turns out, you're a former stand-up, or you did stand-up for a while. But before we get into your work and your opinions, there was one particular incident that obviously changed the course of your life quite profoundly. You're this super promising economist. You've done incredibly well from a very difficult background getting to that position. You're very promising. You do this one study about police brutality and police violence against black suspects in particular, and then you're suddenly under police protection for over a month, and all sorts of other crazy stuff happens. Tell us about that. What happened?
What happened in the study or what happened to me?
Both.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the study, it started back in 2014, and we all got mesmerized by what was going on with Michael Brown, et cetera. And there were protests happening around the country, and I wanted to do something, but protesting is not my thing. Other folks go for it, but it's not my thing. But I wanted to do something that I thought would help. So I thought this was going to be the easiest thing I'd ever done. So I went and tried to collect some data, and I thought I was going to be able to show that the police were biased very easily. I grew up in the South, partly in Florida, partly in Texas. And I grew up not liking the police. So I just thought this was literally the easiest thing I'd ever done. And a colleague came to me and said, "What are you working on these days?" "Oh, I'm just about to write this great paper showing the police fight." And he says, "Interesting. What do you think the police are maximizing? What do you think their side of the story is?" And
what does maximizing mean?
Yeah, so what are they solving for? When they go to work every day, what are their set of incentives? What are they after? What are they trying to achieve at work? And it's something that I had not thought about at all. It was embarrassing, right? And so I made arrangements to figure out how to actually do ride-alongs with the police. And in fact, you guys should do ride-alongs.
We're planning to.
Yeah, you should do it, and bring a weapon. And it's I don't recommend doing it in Camden. That was the first city I'd done it in.
Where's Camden?
Camden, New Jersey.
Okay.
It's a city that has had a lot of crime, and especially given it's relatively small, it's close to Philadelphia. And so here we are on the ride-alongs, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, like, after a few hours, I became the worst police officer you could ever imagine, right? Everyone I saw was like a criminal, right? Like, I was going around, the cops were like, "You really should not be a cop." Because I would go around and I'd say, "What's that guy doing? Dribbling that basketball looks suspicious to me. Let's pull him over." "What do you mean it's pull him over?" Anyway, I did this, and then we gathered literally millions and millions of data points on police use of force. And I, again, thought that this was going to show all sorts of bias. What we found was that in the kind of non-lethal uses of force, so pushing someone up against a car, or drawing your weapon on them but not arresting them, or pushing them on the ground, those types of uses of force, there are large racial differences. There's real racial bias in those uses of force. In fact, just here in New York, a black person during that time was 50% more likely to have force used on them in any given interaction with police officers. Crazy, right? That was lower level use of force. But then we also collected data from 16 different cities across the U.S. on lethal use of force, the kind of force used on Michael Brown and others. That's what the protesting really was about. And in those uses, in those situations, what we found was zero racial differences in the use of force, and that is the part that made people really, really upset, really angry.
Lack of bias made people upset.
Yes, yeah. And in fact, one of the, I talked to a newspaper reporter before the paper was even public, and he says, "I wouldn't write about this. The first part's obvious, and the second part's wrong." What do you do about that? And so we released those results. And look, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here. I mean, not only did we think we did a rigorous job in the actual analysis, but then we literally, when we got these very surprising results, hired new research assistants, had them do it all over again just to make sure that they were robust, right? Like I was a little worried about, not worried, but I wanted to be sensitive about putting results like this out to the world, because they were also counter to my own beliefs. But we did, and yeah, I'd say
that shows so much integrity right there. And I feel like more people need to be willing to do that, but they are so stuck with their ideals, ideologies, beliefs, ideas, everything in reference to who they are, who they become, and what they think, that anything that's counter to that fundamental state of thinking is unbelievable. You can't even fathom it. And most people at the end of the day are wrong, which is fine, because it's based on a limited amount of experience and perspective. Most of y'all are just wrong, and it's all good. I mean, I have a lot of perspective. I learn from a lot of different sources. I've met a lot of different people. Even I'm wrong, for sure, because I only have so much knowledge. I have a knowledge of a lot of different things, but it's still limited to having complete knowledge, right? You only can know what you know. That's why these type of experiments are so enlightening, especially done from someone who is trying to be unbiased and who is specifically affected based on what is going on. So non-lethal force, still problematic. We still need to clean that up. But lethal force, I'm not surprised about.
For a while, I thought, yes, the world was turned upside down. Yes, there were threats against my family. But the interesting part was there were thousands and thousands of emails that came from places like Kansas and Colorado, everywhere across the U.S. who said, wow, thanks for actually using data to shed at least some light on this. And I've got the following 30,000 questions, but at least you're bringing real analysis to this question because our city is literally burning and no one's talking about what the actual facts are. Well, thank you. And I engaged with lots of people on that dimension. But yes, I was very, very surprised at how upset, fellow academics got. As I've said before, I was taking the side and said, you're ruining your career. And I naively thought we were in this to actually develop a set of facts. I actually thought that's what tenure was for. I later realized it was for drinking Chardonnay at 10:30 in the morning. But at that point, I thought tenure was for going after the truth, even if it was unpopular, and that the university was going to protect you from whatever may come of you being a real social scientist, or at least following the facts as you saw fit. So we produced this result. I'm still very, very proud of the work we did, but I highly underestimated the response.
Roland, there's something before we get into all of that. Yeah. You said that, I think in the study, correct me if I'm wrong, Black and Hispanic people are more likely to be pushed around by the police, suffer physical force, etc., etc. Do we know why that is particularly? Is it that people from those types of communities are more likely to see the police as a threat and therefore they're more likely to resist arrest? Is it that the police go in more aggressively? Do we know what is actually happening?
That's a great question. We don't have a perfect answer on that, but we have some threads. So one of the most interesting coefficients in that study to me is that when the police report that a suspect is fully compliant, they were not arrested, and no contraband was found, nothing went wrong in this traffic stop, as reported by the police. Blacks are 25% more likely to have force used on them, even in those interactions, right? And so,
still problematic.
Police departments who written them in says, you're saying use of force, but what you really mean is response to resistance. And no, that's not what I mean. I mean use of force here, because even in situations where, again, I can't emphasize this enough, the police report they're fully compliant, right? I took a lot of flack when people say, how dumb can you be? You use police reports. Well, stop and think for a second. If the police are reported it, and you can still find bias in that data, you can really believe it. See what I'm saying? And so the police report them being fully compliant, and yet there's still a large racial difference in use of force. So I don't know exactly why that is. We did some very a set of pretty rigorous bias tests. So we actually think there is it's racial discrimination. Part of it is racial discrimination, not all of it. Some of it can be explained also by the behavior of civilians. That also differs, but you can't explain all of it. So I think there's enough kind of not fault, but there's enough both sides of that equation that you described. Civilians acting differently, police potentially being biased. We find evidence for both of those. And now the key question is, what can we actually do about it, right? And
that is a key question.
A way to work with police departments to eliminate this type of bias, because I think it's at the root of a lot of the discontent in Black neighborhoods between the police and civilians.
I do think it needs to start at the police level for the circumstance that he's talking about. You're not really going to change the civilians' minds, right? They're going to have a notion. They're going to act upon the notion. But for the examples that he is bringing out in terms of being fully compliant and still using force, that I think has to 100% go towards the police officer. It just does. Regardless of what is said, regardless of what happens, if they're compliant, then it's up to you to act appropriately. So that takes understanding your bias, understanding the potential racism that is taking place, and whether that's the police department giving them more training in terms of being able to interact with different types of communities, so they don't have a immediate preconceived notion that a certain race is going to act a certain way, or whether that's the individual interacting with different types of people. That is something that is 100% needed.
If we admit that some of the racial differences use force are due to bias, and then there's a controversial shooting, it's almost irrational for someone in the community not to believe the shooting before you saw this data, right? You say, well, on the things I do know, I know there's discrimination. On the thing I can't really observe, I wasn't at the shooting. Probably was discrimination, right? And so I think this is a point that we don't make enough. But if it's hard to negotiate with the police directly on shootings, right? Hold your weapon, that's hard. Their lives are at stake too.
Yeah.
But on the lower level uses of force, right? Every department I've talked to privately knows that there's things that they can do better on the lower level uses of force that would then garner community support so that we can actually have productive conversations when a controversial shooting happens.
Roland, I feel like we're getting into the meat of the conversation, which is great, but I want to take one quick detour before we carry on that part, which is you said something that I think in the moment that we're sitting here is a very interesting conversation to at least explore, which is you said protesting isn't for me. Why?
There are many ways of making a difference, right? And
I'm not a big protest guy either.
Have free expression and to protest, great. It's just economically, it's not my comparative advantage.
Okay.
Right. I am a data nerd, so when I see a problem, my first inclination is not to.
The thing that I found disappointing from the reaction and the inevitable fallout, well, it's inevitable now with the benefit of hindsight, is your report, as we've touched on, raised some really interesting points, which actually, if we look at the results dispassionately, there are things that we all need to work on, particularly the police. And actually, if we address them, we could make relations between the African American community and the police so much better. And actually, we could have, as a result of that, a more cohesive society.
Look, where were you in 2016?
Keeping my head down, though. That's what I'm doing.
That's controversial. Right. Of course, yes, 100%. But that's the reason I think there was so much pushback, because it was coming from different directions. Literally, the emails I was getting, the communication I was getting. On the one hand, people thought, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? This is not true. There's, police are out there murdering innocent Black people." And on the other hand, I had police telling me, "What are you talking about? We're not biased, right?" And in fact, right, when we published this in the New York Times, the folks that were interviewing at the time, they were more concerned with calling NYPD biased than they were saying the shootings were unbiased at the time. Very, very different now, but at the time, that's where the nervousness was coming from when they published.
The world has changed.
He's apparently remained the same.
I'm consistent. How much do you think the reaction to your report and the fallout and the general narratives are to do with history, the way that the police has behaved in the past? If we think about things like Rodney King, for instance, and all of those types of incidents.
It has a lot to do with that. Again, the relationship between Black communities and the police are broken in most communities. And
For sure.
I believe, just like you just described, working together on these lower level uses of force, when the stakes are lower, that is the place to really have reform. Right? It's hard when the police go to a scene, there's weapons involved, and you say, "Well, now is the time to compromise." No, I'm not sure. Okay, and so that's that is the source. And so there have been years and years, decades of contentious relationships between Black people and the police. So, but if you go to Black neighborhoods, none of this surprises anybody. And it's just come into the mainstream in the last few years. But this has been boiling over for a while. And again, the frustrating part to me is, if we can all look clear-eyed at the data, there are positive things we can do for change. Right? These are not marks on a chalkboard. This isn't academic research anymore. That's done. The question is, how are we going to work together to actually create better relationships between communities and police in a way that's productive, in a way that we can actually talk through some of the difficult issues?
It seems like
These are a lot of great points. I'm not gonna lie. I'm probably gonna end it here. If you guys want to watch the full version, for sure, go ahead on the Trigonometry channel. But it really goes into one when it comes down to like police brutality and all that stuff. I feel like it needs to be a more thoughtful conversation than saying that all Black people are criminals or all police are racist. I think for the most part, it's going to require a kind of different approach. And I do think there needs to be one side that needs to take some accountability and some maturity to start finding the solutions. And what I mean by this is that I think the police department in particular, I think the people online, the chronic online weirdos, and then the community itself, you can't really expect them to really change how they think. But the police department can change how they're viewed. And more people should look for the truth and give out the truth and hope the truth really sticks to some people, like this professor did. But ultimately, the police department will have to change their approach to basically, to the point where it's almost zero, eliminate this whole entire notion of racial bias. And even though there's really no stark differences in terms of lethal force, in terms of non-lethal force, 25% difference is still quite a bit. So we got to get all of it to zero, to be honest. But that just helps the problem and work towards the solution. But that's all we got for today. Appreciate everybody who watched. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.